So it started
24th June 1947 at 3 p.m. To ufologists, this date represents the ground zero of ufological study. Kenneth Arnold, at that point a civilian pilot, was an XP-47 fighter pilot. On the referred date, he was piloting a Colair Model A in the state of Washington, US. Arnold was looking for a C-54 cargo plane that lost contact with its base and was believed to be downed in the region. Arnold was close to Mount Rainier when he observed a formation of 9 objects that, following his calculations, were at Mach 2. No plane at that time could reach such speed. He made the point of looking from the open cockpit to make sure it wasn't dust from the window. Arnold flew to Yakima, and while refueling the plane, he told his story in detail. When he arrived at the airdrome in Pendleton, Oregon, there was a group of reporters expecting him. They wanted his story first-hand. Arnold believed that what he saw was a secret aircraft being tested, all 9 of them. Describing the objects, he used the term saucer-like. A reporter then interpreted what Arnold just said and coined the term flying saucers. It stuck. The story spread like fire. Arnold seemed genuine, honest and clear. There was a huge interest from the public. Not only that, he encouraged the public to come forward and report many cases that happened in the previous months, many of them of great interest. The military didn't put an immediate lid upon it. They were also curious and interested in the developments. They also appeared puzzled. The intelligence apparatus had a few concerns of their own. Were the objects from the Soviets? The Cold War was starting to heat up. There was some discrete study on the ghost rockets and the full fighters being conducted. Were these Soviet experiments taking advantage of recent Nazi technology just captured? There was also a preoccupation with the psychological warfare aspect, considering the previous experience with the Orson Welles broadcasting, which in 1938 caused some panic on the least attentive of the listeners. The intelligence considered monitoring the reports and the effect that it was causing on the population. There are a few more things to be considered on the Kenneth Arnold sighting that is relevant to be included here. Firstly, Arnold described the crafts from his point of view a bit more of a delta craft rather than the classic saucer type UFO. Some groups speculated that the aircraft was a squadron of the Nazi Houghton A229, either captured by the Americans or by the Soviets. Later, some fringe groups considered that the Nazis based on the Antarctic were launching these incursions. The proposal is quite ludicrous, as this type of airplane was still on tests and it was barely operational. Another point that is barely talked about was that Arnold's sighting had some corroboration. There was a second person who described a very similar scene. At the right time frame, Fred Johnson was a prospector and was at Cascade Mountains by 3 p.m., the same time of Arnold's sighting. The distance among the two elevations is about 100 miles. Fred could envisage a formation of about 5 disc-shaped objects. He also noted that his compass oscillated wildly while the objects were passing by. The objects had even made an electromagnetic effect on his instruments. Still, on the Project Blue Book, the sighting is not considered as an unknown. It was put down as a mirage. Since this first sighting, a whole range of people went on trying to discredit Arnold's sighting. The rationale behind it is simple. If this sighting was a mirage, then the next sightings would probably be considered mirages or people who were seen too much due to media broadcasting. The belief was that the false impression of a phenomenon would take a life of its own, fooled by fear, imagination, and the media attention. That is the idea that the phenomenon was in fact a new urban myth, a fact believed by some even today. It is not widely said, but the UFOs were already investigated. They were part of the investigation on the Foo Fighters and the ghost rockets. Kevin Randall draws attention to the function Colonel Howard McCoy played in studying and determining the source and the purpose of the Foo Fighters. In December 1946, McCoy received orders from Lieutenant General Nathan Twining to make an unofficial study on the ghost rockets. The phenomenon was now over the US, quoting Randall.
They set up their investigation in a single locked room at Wright Field. Access was limited to only a few people, but when the Arnold sighting was made on June 24, 1947, and more importantly reported in newspapers around the country, the unofficial investigation evolved into one with official status.
This group would make what we call Project Sign. They already had some files on the UFO phenomenon. Strangely, none of these files made it into Project Blue Book. They had a good handful of cases. Those are just a few of them.
On August 1, 1946, Captain Jack Puckett was flying a C-47 transport about 40 miles north of Tampa, Florida, when he sighted a cigar-shaped craft. Puckett would later say,
"I observed what I thought to be a shooting star to the southeast over the Atlantic Ocean. My copilot, Let Henry F. Glass, and my engineer both observed this object at the same time. This object continued toward us on a collision course at our exact altitude. At about 1,000 yards it veered to cross our path. We observed it to be a long, cylindrical shape approximately twice the size of a B-29 with luminous portholes."
In January, there was a case of interception in Britain when two fighters scrambled. 1st of April, there was a UFO over Richmond, Virginia. The UFO was observed by a team that was deploying a meteorological balloon. The object was seen more than once by the crew in different dates. It was clear that there were cases before Arnold's and many after that. The unexplained sightings kept appearing at a rapid pace. Now, we shall talk briefly about another and interesting side event. There isn't a very rigorous chronology, but it seems there was a UFO crash at Roswell, probably on the 2nd of July. On the 18th, the news report was released. Since it was released, the Air Force quickly offered an alternative explanation. A weather balloon was a real reason. In this brief episode, we tried to report the first impressions that the phenomenon bore upon the general public and on the military. It wasn't immediately clear that the phenomenon was from out of this world, but it was very puzzling and it was definitely artificial. This phenomenon required a proper studying. We shall talk more about that later. Project Sign was next, an official attempt to respond. The time was right, and this was only the first crack.
This video was based on the following books: Kevin Randall Roswell in the 21st Century and the Government UFO Files, The Conspiracy of Cover, Richard Dolan's UFOs, and the National Security State, Chronology of a Cover-Up. The text was taken directly from Dan Zarfati's The Time is Right, Book 1. If you enjoyed this content, consider engaging.
Life would be easier if Zarfati's book was available in my time.